If you're born in India, you're probably a Hindu. If you're born in America, you're probably a Christian. If you're born in Pakistan, you're probably a Muslim. That's a coincidence, isn't it? That you're always born into the right God. Always, isn't that lucky? I was born into the right God. All those others are going to hell, but I was born into the right religion. I'm going to heaven.
For people who say we ought not be involved politically, we just ought to preach the gospel, I always say, guess what? Your ability to preach the gospel legally is based on politics.
One of the signs that the second coming is that the stars will fall out of the sky and land on earth. So to even write that means you don't know what those things are. You have no concept of what the actual universe is.
You can separate God from religion, which is what I do. I believe in God. I believe in me. Same person.
All right, tough questions, right? This whole series is about these kind of tough statements, tough questions. And that's a good thing. It gives us a chance to chat about them a little bit, to take a look at what's going on in our world, things we say, things we believe. This week as I was preparing for this series, I ran across something I hadn't heard of before called anti-humor. Ever heard of anti-humor before? Okay, Austin, you've heard of anti-humor? I had not heard of this before, and I thought since you love my jokes so much, I'd give you a break and give you some anti-humor, all right? So here are some examples of anti-humor. What's red and smells like blue paint? Red paint. Anti-humor. Okay, if you're a graduate, what two words will open a lot of doors in your life? What two words will open a lot of doors in your life? Push and pull. What do you call a boomerang that doesn't come back? A stick. Excellent, all right. What do a duck and a bicycle have in common? What do a duck and a bicycle have in common? They both have handlebars, except for the duck. Okay, last one. What do you get when you cross a joke with a rhetorical question? Okay, so moving on. All right, these are called anti-jokes because they're not funny. That's the idea, right? Anti-humor. Well, here's the thing about anti. Too often, I think the church comes off, or Christians come off, as looking anti-things. We are defined by what we are not, as opposed to what we are. What we don't believe, but what we do believe. Now, sometimes that's our own fault. Sometimes Christians can give off an anti-vibe. We focus on what we are against, and we arrange ourselves in a way that is anti-certain things. Other times, it's not our fault. We are labeled as anti-something. If we don't agree with a certain position or a certain perspective or someone's viewpoint, we're not on board with them, we are seen anti whatever that thing is. Instead of what we are for, we are labeled by what we are against. And that's not our fault. We can't always help that. What we have to do, though, what the response to this perhaps is, we need to know what we are for. Right? We as Christians, as people of faith, need to know what it is we do stand for. What do we believe? What are we for? And kind of focus on that so we don't give off that anti-vibe. Now, that's going to take some work. And so the next few weeks, we are going to kind of put up the please stand by sign and kind of focus on what do we believe about these more controversial topics in our culture. What do we stand for? And we're going to do that in a way that is conversational and not confrontational. Right? We want to have a conversation, not dwell in sound bites, not dwell in either-or type statements. And we're going to do that respectfully. In 1 Peter 3, we kind of have our rules of engagement here. He says, always be ready to make a defense to anyone who demands from you an accounting for the hope that is within you. You need to know what you believe. You need to know what you stand for. And then he says, yet do it with gentleness and reverence. So how we engage the conversation, the way we go about it, is critical. Because I think God is interested in the relationships, in righteousness, than being right. About the relationships we encounter than the arguments we win. It's kind of developing those loving, compassionate, reverent, respectful relationships as we have these discussions of what we stand for. Now today we're going to start off with a huge topic. It's one of the biggest ones we're going to cover. And it's one that remains around this idea of Christians and being anti. And that is, are Christians really anti-science? Are Christians anti-science? Are we against the things that science teaches? Does it mean that as a Christian, you have to check your brain at the door? You have to give up that scientific method to have faith? To believe in a creator, does that mean you are by nature anti-science? Is that what that is saying? And we get this idea that there's two sides. It's A or B. Like last week, we talked about this. It's this or it's that. You are pro-faith or anti-science. Or you're pro-science and against the creator. Like somehow these two worlds are in two different spheres that never coexist. And we see this played out again and again on bumper stickers all across the country. Ever seen this? Little fish on the back of a car? Okay, you know, this is called an ichthys, this little fish symbol. And ichthys is the Greek word for fish. It just means fish. If you're going to go fishing, you're going to go ichthysing, I guess, okay? So ichthys, and it's an acronym then for Jesus, Christ, God's Son, Savior. That's why the fish and Jesus kind of go together. That's the story behind the ichthys. Well, people saw this, and those who kind of followed Darwin and evolution did this, made a Darwin fish with little feet on it, okay? Well, then that was taken a step farther, and then you get images of the Darwin fish eating the Jesus fish, or the Jesus fish eating the Darwin fish. And then it went one step farther, and then you get the T-Rex eating the Jesus fish, eating the Darwin fish, ending with this one, the Star Trek fish. Like, you kind of wonder, how did we get there, right? This thing kind of escalates, right? And it's this like bumper sticker theology. It's like one little statement. What do you believe? And what don't you believe? And what are you for? What are you against? What are you anti? What are you pro? I mean, we get this kind of idea, right? And the real difficulty, the real problem is those people out in the world that have honest questions, that really want to know, that really are puzzling over this stuff, see this and go, okay, I'm not listening to you. Because you're trying to convince me of something. I want a conversation, not confrontation. So we need to learn how it is we can have these discussions about religion and science in such a way that is not overly simplistic. So I want to start today with this. What does science and religion have in common? What does faith and science have in common? And to me, the one thing they have in common, at least to start with, is that they both ask questions. Big questions. Important questions of our world. Both seen and unseen. Both ask questions. What are the stars? What is their purpose? Tell me about the unpredictable weather patterns in our world that cause monsoons to come up in the summer in Arizona. Or how is it that we can create crops that are resistant to drought? What about the little particles that are subatomic we can't see and are so unpredictable in their behavior? And why is it that God acts in such mysterious ways? Why is it that I am passionate about some things and not about others? Why do we love? Why do bad things happen to good people? You know, these are all huge questions that science deals with and theology deals with as well. Now, one of the ways that science deals with this is something called the scientific method. And if you're in middle school, you probably got a little taste of this. Who's heard of the scientific method? Okay, everyone else went to U of A, right? Just kidding. All right, so you got the scientific method, and it's a pretty simple thing. It's not really super complicated. In fact, you use it all the time. And the idea is that you ask questions, you form a hypothesis, you test the hypothesis with an experiment, you prove or disprove it, and start all over again. That's kind of the process of the scientific method. This past week here at Chaparral, this happened. We had some lights in the lobby and in the nursery toddler area that were going on randomly. They're kind of like on, half on, half off, just really random. And so the first thing you do is you get a couple engineers on the case. So Jim Langdahl, Gary Cooper went and said, okay, we're going to figure this thing out. So first question, why the lights won't come on? Hypothesis, it's the fuse. Test hypothesis, fuse on, fuse off. Nope, that wasn't it. So you do it again, right? Ask more questions, make a hypothesis, test it. So they did this for a week. End up finding out, tracing all this thing back, that there was a junction box somewhere in the ceiling that no one really probably knew about, that a wire had become kind of half in contact with each other, was causing loops to go back and forth through this little wire. Little problem, right? So they saw that, fixed it, tested the hypothesis. Was it the wire? Yep, it was. Lights came on, life was good, and they saw the light was good. Get it? Sorry. A little theology and science come together? Okay. But you get the idea, right? That's kind of what it does. And the scientific method gives us a lot of great things. Like we can go into space. We build bridges, cure diseases, indoor plumbing. All these things are great things that science can provide for us. So why would we as Christians want to be anti that stuff? Anti-science. In Psalm 24, verse 1, it says, "The earth is the Lord's and all that is in it, the world and all those who live in it." So if God has all of this, why not learn about it, about what God has made, see what God has done? In fact, do you know where the scientific method came from? Where it was first developed? In a church. In the 13th century, a guy named Roger Bacon, an English monk, he was a minister, was the first to really record and develop what we call today the scientific method. He made observations, hypotheses, experiments in such detail that we repeated. He kind of developed science. And he was a minister, a monk in a church. Thomas Aquinas later comes along about the same time and says the earth is a laboratory for learning about God. You can learn about God by looking at what God has made. It's got his fingerprints all over it. So study that, and you can learn about who God is. So we study the world, and we can learn some things about God. So the truth is, there is nothing that science will discover that's going to surprise God. It won't be like, oh, I didn't know I did that. That's pretty cool. It's not going to happen, right? God made these things, so why not listen when science teaches us things about what God has made? So the church, or theology, or faith, has things it can learn from science, which is good, and not to be afraid of. At the same time, science can learn some things from theology and faith. It goes both ways. Because there are different tools for different tasks. Like if you go to the dentist today, or tomorrow, or maybe actually Tuesday. So you go to the dentist, right? And you go in there, and the dentist, and she pulls out a huge Craftsman red and black tool chest, like mechanics use in your car. She pulls that out next to your chair, and then pulls out an impact wrench. What are you thinking? Wrong tools for the job, right? I need a different set of tools to be a dentist, not mechanic tools. Well, in many ways, the questions that science and theology asks are different and require different tools. Now, this is an overgeneralization a little bit, but the reality is, at least in my opinion, science is really good at the what and how questions. In my days as an engineer, I really enjoyed learning the what and the how this worked, what this does. And that it can answer and is equipped to answer those questions. But the who did it and why it happened, those things, I think theology is a bit more geared toward. So for example, take a look at birds. Science can tell us how they sing, how that works. How's it used for mating? But the why birds and their songs are pleasant to us to listen to, that's a little different question. Why do we like birds singing in the morning? Or how about cell phones? Incredible technology. I mean, really awesome. Almost miraculous in what you can do on a cell phone today, right? That came through science. But the ways we use that, how does it affect our relationships? Is it an addiction that we can get caught up in and therefore change our personalities? What do we watch on it? How do we use it? Those questions have more of a moral side to them, and theology is better at those kinds of questions. Or one more, and this is what we're going to really focus on today. Probably the biggest question that comes up that you see science and religion kind of coming together like this on is the story of creation, the story of beginnings, and where the world came from. And often we see the differences, the conflict is caused by different set of questions and a different set of tools. It's really kind of that simple. Because sometimes we take tools that science uses and want to apply them to the Bible, and tools that the Bible uses and apply them to science, and they're kind of different. They have different purposes in what they are designed to do. So take a look at Genesis 1. Now, we can't really dive deep into it today, but Genesis 1 is sometimes used to show how God made the world. He did it in 6 days, and the rest on the seventh, and all this kind of stuff. But when you really read it, especially when you take a look at it in Hebrew, it's more poetic. What Genesis 1 is really doing is not telling us how or what, it's really telling us answers to the questions of who did it and why. Look at Genesis 1, and you see God calling out things into existence with his words. He takes what he thinks, it says it, and boom, it happens. He is that sovereign that he can create with a word. Let there be light, and there was light. And then he can judge that light. He can call it good. He can name it because he's a sovereign. He is one that can limit chaos. He takes the chaoticness of the seas and stops them with a word. And then causes them to move at his direction and what he wants them to do. He gives them purpose and meaning. And then on the seventh day, what did he do? He rested. He didn't quit and go home. He rested because he's still involved in the world. So we see Genesis 1 really telling us about who made it, his character, who he is, why he did these things, and not so much about what exactly happened. And when theologians get too caught up in trying to prove a 6-day creation, they maybe go beyond what the authors intended in that text. We kind of miss the who and the why because we're focused on answering questions of what, which the Bible never really talks about. It wasn't concerned about that like we are. That's our questions, not theirs. But science has some great things to say about the what. Maybe we can listen to those things. John Polkinghorne was a renowned physicist on the level of Albert Einstein, Niels Bohr, really great physicist. And he began to ask questions that he couldn't answer with science. And so what he did is he kind of transitioned from being just a physicist to an Anglican priest. He went to seminary and became a priest because he said in his books there were questions that science pointed to, but he couldn't answer. And so he's looking for answers beyond those questions that he was asking, and he found those in the church. And so he has his feet in both worlds, where he sees a conversation, not a confrontation, between science and religion. He said science points beyond itself in ways that are certainly capable of religious interpretation. Now, what is he saying there? This is a big, big statement. He's saying when you look at science, and look at the world through science's eyes, you'll see fingerprints of God. Not God was here, but fingerprints of a creator, because he made these things. So the next question is, who's the creator? What's that creator like? What's that creator expect? Those questions he couldn't get to because he could only get to the fingerprints. To explain this a little bit more, I've got a video I want to show you that kind of gets this idea of science can get us to the fingerprints, but not beyond the fingerprints. Take a look at this.
From galaxies and stars, down to atoms and subatomic particles, the very structure of our universe is determined by these numbers. These are the fundamental constants and quantities of the universe. Scientists have come to the shocking realization that each of these numbers has been carefully dialed to an astonishingly precise value, a value that falls within an exceedingly narrow, life-permitting range. If any one of these numbers were altered by even a hair's breadth, no physical, interactive life of any kind could exist anywhere. There'd be no stars, no life, no planets, no chemistry, Consider gravity, for example. The force of gravity is determined by the gravitational constant. If this constant varied by just 1 in 10 to the 60th parts, none of us would exist. To understand how exceedingly narrow this life-permitting range is, imagine a dial divided into 10 to the 60th increments. To get a handle on how many tiny points on the dial this is, compare it to the number of cells in your body, or the number of seconds that have ticked by since time began. If the gravitational constant had been out of tune by just one of these infinitesimally small increments, the universe would either have expanded and thinned out so rapidly that no stars could form and life couldn't exist, or it would have collapsed back on itself with the same result: no stars, no planets, and no life. The fact is, our universe permits physical, interactive life only because these, and many other numbers, have been independently and exquisitely balanced on a razor's edge. Wherever physicists look, they see examples of fine-tuning. The remarkable fact is that the values of these numbers seem to have been very finely adjusted to make possible the development of life. If anyone claims not to be surprised by the special features that the universe has, he's hiding his head in the sand. These special features are surprising and unlikely. Given the implausibility of physical necessity or chance, the best explanation for why the universe is fine-tuned for life may very well be it was designed that way. A common-sense interpretation of the facts suggests that a superintellect monkeyed with physics, and that there are no blind forces worth speaking about in nature. The numbers one calculates from the facts seem to me so overwhelming as to put this conclusion almost beyond question. There is for me powerful evidence that there is something going on behind it all. It seems as though somebody has fine-tuned nature's numbers to make the universe. The impression of design is overwhelming. The heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hands. Day after day they pour forth speech. Night after night they reveal knowledge.
All right, so Psalm 19, right? Day by day it pour forth snow. That you can see God's handiwork, his fingerprints in creation. So why is it then that we have different conclusions? Why is this even still a debate? When these great scientists say, look, we see that there's this fine-tuning, this magnificence of creation, we see God's fingerprints, but we can't prove God. Well, the difference often is because all of us, not just with this issue, but many issues, we have perspectives we bring to the table and to the conversation. We have assumptions and perspectives that we have, commitments. Maybe it's to your friends or your coworkers or your traditions, but just the way you are that brings certain ideas to the table. Polkinghorne calls these spectacles behind the eyes, lenses that we see the world through. And sometimes those lenses color the evidence that we both see. And it's hard to have a conversation when you have preconceived notions of what you're going to see. So if you go to the evidence and say, there is no God, and then look at the evidence, you're not going to find a God. Or any issue that comes to the point where you bring some perspective to the evidence that we all see. And that's what Polkinghorne says is kind of the problem, that we have to learn to have a conversation, not just confrontation. In fact, take a look at this. This is in Psalm 147. I want you to look at the pairings of what the theologian sees when he sees creation. He says, God heals the brokenhearted and binds up their wounds. He determines the number of the stars, and he gives to all of them their names. God names all those billions and billions and billions of stars. He names them. I don't know my first cousin's names, but God names the stars and creates the stars. This is a great, huge statement. And it's paired with, he heals the brokenhearted. Like, how do those two go together? The creator of the universe, who did all these magnificent things, cares what? About you and me and our broken hearts. That's what's important to the theologian. Then verse 5 and 6. Great is our God and abundant in power. His understanding is beyond measure. He's the greatest scientist ever. He knows all things, understands all things, and yet the Lord lifts up the downtrodden. You catch that? Like the theologian says, who is the God that's behind these great things? A God who cares about people and broken hearts. That when you're stressed out and downtrodden and beaten down and you feel like you can't go one more step, you're just exhausted, that God who made all these things cares about that. That was powerful to the author of Psalm 147. Look at it another way. You have in your body a bunch of cells, right? And in 20 seconds' time, you will replace 20 billion of those cells in your body in 20 seconds. So why are you tired all the time? Because you build all these cells all the time. Or how about this? In your lifetime, you will slough off 44 pounds of dead skin. Kind of gross, right? But it's true. There's all this work going on right now in your body. In 20 seconds, you replace 20 billion cells. And yet it says in Matthew 10:30, even the hairs in your head are all counted. That God cares about you. And I think that's the kind of the powerful thing about this dialogue, is this great creator who can do all these great things cares about the little things of our lives. So what do? Where do we leave the conversation of religion and science and dialogue? And I think it starts with this. Keep learning. Keep paying attention to the world. Like Aquinas said, the earth is a laboratory for learning about God. Keep learning. Learn new things. Get excited about science. Get excited about the world. Get excited to learn what God has done among us in the stars and in subatomic stuff, in the world. Learn about that kind of thing. It's exciting and new and fresh. Or take for example, this little fact, which I think is awesome. You take all the animals on the earth, every animal, big to small. What is the average size of an animal on the planet? How many say a horse? How about a dog? Okay, I got one. How about a rat? How about a fly? Yeah, a fly. A housefly is the average size of a creature on the earth. Isn't that crazy? It's true though, right? So we have these great, amazing things. The second thing is this. It goes with Psalm 147. Continue to love. I mean, keep learning about what God has done in creation, but also continue to love. Because like the psalmist did, here's this great God who did all these great things, and he loves, and he cares for the downtrodden. In Matthew 22, Jesus is kind of giving this statement about what is most important. And he said, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the greatest and first commandment. And the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. Now, that's the end of the argument, Jesus says. This is the most important stuff. Now look at it this way. The God who made all those stars, all those galaxies, all those subatomic neutrinos and stuff like that, who made all creation, all the cells in your body, all the neurons, all that stuff, all of that. Put it all in your head right now. Took all of that for what purpose? Why? Well, it says here, so that you and I can make good decisions about how we treat people. That's what it says. All of creation looks on at how we treat the cashier. All creation looks at how we treat the waiter or waitress at the restaurant. How we treat the person we drive next to on Shea. How we love people. Do we take care of the downtrodden? Do we take care of the brokenhearted? All of creation looks at that. No pressure. That's what it looks to. So, at the end of the age, on the last day, at the judgment, is Jesus going to ask you what Planck's constant is? Or what the gravitational constant in the universe is? No. He doesn't ask you, do you love me? Did you take care of my sheep? Did you take care of people? Did you love them? All creation is going to come to that question. Period. Let's pray together.